Am I live?
Did you hit the live, go live button with the camera?
I think I am. Hey everyone. Still trying to decide if I'm live. Those of you that have followed me for a while know that I am not the most tech savvy of everybody. A little weird for someone of my generation. Most people have learned technology as it has come to us and have mastered it. But I am famous for my fights with printers, and I am known to shut down computers. I have some sort of like electromagnetic field or whatever, that thing that jewelers talk about where you shut down wristwatches and stuff like that. Like jewelers really put a lot of stock in this. For science, it's more like mumbo jumbo talk. And my background is in science, so if I wasn't the one that it happened to, I would probably think it was mumbo jumbo too. But I have seen it happen over and over again. Computers go haywire, and then my husband will come over and it will behave perfectly normal for him. Digital cameras, remember those before our phones snapped great shots? And those people that have those super fancy cameras still utilize them, of course. Somebody hands me a digital camera and it'll be like, and it won't take, it absolutely will not take a photograph. And then I hand it back and it does just fine. Or I hand it to my husband and he won't do anything different than I'm doing. Snaps a picture, just fine. Bitter party one. And what do I do most of my day? Work with computers. But I kid, mostly because I am learning technology and I'm pretty quick about picking up stuff. And once I learn something, I got it. But this whole Facebook Live thing is still pretty new to me because there's long gaps of time between when I use it. But hopefully with these events every few days for this month, I will learn it pretty well. So I've been talking for quite a while. How are you? That good, huh? I do hope you are well and having fun and reading something interesting and all that good stuff. I'll wait a couple more minutes and then I'll get started. I have found some interesting reads as well. I've been able to read a bit more than usual. Usually I have a lot. I usually am one of those people that fills up my days with just busyness. I think one of my kids is like roaming around. And my tech support did not close the door, so you're going to hear everything that happens out there. I'm here in my office. If you can't see, all this stuff behind me is my office stuff. There's my tech support, my nice husband. So what was I saying? Yes, I have been able to read more because we have been, of course, prevented from being super busy, going out, having meetings, that kind of thing. So all of our meetings have shifted to virtual, digital, and that, kind of shrinks our meeting time because we're not driving and we're not just taking a lot of time hanging out. A lot of our meetings are what needs to happen and maybe a little bit of like, hey, what's going on with you? I'm hanging out at home. Oh, you too? You know how it goes. Okay, so I will get started. Thank you for joining me again today, or welcome for those of you that weren't able to join us on Monday or didn't even know that we had a live on Monday. This is the second Facebook Live event in the series, and I, once again, am author and speaker Sara R. Turnquist. I write clean historical romance, and I am a multi-published author. Today I will be sharing, I find my words, I will be sharing my second published book, and it is a standalone, so I will only be sharing that book today. But feel free to ask questions in the comment section, and my technical support will answer them as much as he can. If he comes across a question that is beyond his scope, then he'll just leave it for me to answer after the live. And please hang out, and we will do a giveaway at the end, and there will be details for that at the end. So here it is. This is the book that we're doing today. This is The General's Wife. And this book also holds a special place in my heart. They all do, but for different reasons. But this one, because this was actually the first book that I wrote as a complete book. And even though it was the second one that was picked up by the publisher, it's the first one that I wrote. The cover was designed by Cora Graphics. And interestingly enough, when I filled out my paperwork for the cover designer, I requested that there not be pyramids in the background. See, there are. And the reason for that is because I felt like pyramids on a cover for a book that was set in ancient Egypt was a little cliche. But when the first cover design came back and there were not pyramids in the background, it was a little difficult for the onlooker, for the reader, to discern where the book was set. It was kind of vague based on the background. So I decided that the pyramids were necessary, or some kind of structure artifact that spoke to ancient Egypt. And I really think that the cover designer, that Cora, did a really good job, tasteful, putting the pyramids back there, but not making it very cliche. So the character that's on the front, her name is Ismene. And I know what you're thinking. I really do. I'm really insightful like that. You're thinking, that's a Greek name, and those are Grecian clothing items. You would be right. Good catch, reader. And I will explain all. Believe me, I will, in due time. So the other thing I want to talk about briefly on the cover is the tagline. The tagline says, "Facing an uncertain destiny, can one woman's spirit overcome?" So just from looking at the cover, we've learned a few things. And from the tagline, we can learn that our character is moving towards something that's a little overwhelming and is going to challenge kind of the core of who she is. Now we're going to do the bookstore thing, and we're going to flip it over and read the back cover copy. How do you choose between the man you love and the man you are destined to marry? Ismene, a beautiful, somewhat naive young noblewoman, is torn from her childhood home in Greece and her first love. Bound by honor and duty, she marries Pharaoh's chief military commander, Alastair. Though determined to remain true to the man she left behind, her new husband stirs feelings in her she cannot ignore. Attempting to accept this brazen new culture, it isn't long before she discovers that the locals don't like her. The Alexandrian mob starts making anonymous threats. This faceless group will stop at nothing to achieve its goal of driving out the unwelcome Greeks. In the midst of these heightening attacks, the general must leave for battle. Ismene fears that she is on her own. evidence of a spy within her own household arises. It soon becomes apparent that one of these Egyptian rebels wants her dead. The safety of Ismene and possibly the entire ruling class of Egypt hangs in the balance. Intrigued? Dun dun dun. So, typically, as we talked about last time, if you are in a bookstore with a book like this, you've looked at the front, you've looked at the back, and usually you'll either decide to buy the book based on that, or you'll look at the first page and maybe read a few lines of the first page. And some people, who some would describe as monsters, will look at the final page and read the ending. I'll let you decide what you call those people. Or maybe you're one of those people. I don't know. I love you all. So not all readers are familiar with all periods of history. And I'll tell you a secret. Not all historical romance writers are either. So how do writers and readers learn about different periods in history? One of the things that historical romance and historical fiction readers like about reading in that genre is that they get to learn about these tidbits in history that are just fascinating and interesting to them. Well, historical writers who don't have a history background learn about these different pieces of history from their experiences, from reading, and just from picking it up along the way. So for me, in this book, for me to tell you where I got the inspiration for this book, what writers call the seed or the spark, basically the idea of where the story came from, we'll have to go all the way back to my middle school history class. Talk about far, far away, a galaxy far, far away, long, long ago. I think I got that backwards. Talk about a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Yeah, and the joke is dead. So my history class in middle school, don't remember which year, was learning about the Ptolemaic period in history. And this occurred just after Alexander the Great. That may be a name that more people are familiar with. So Alexander the Great conquered most of what was known of the ancient world at that time. I repeat myself. So after he died, it became a little fuzzy about what should happen to all of this land, all of these areas that he had taken control of. So what ended up happening is that his generals just kind of took over the area that they were in. And Ptolemy, a Greek man, one of his generals, was in Egypt. And so he just named himself King of Egypt. And as many of us know, Egyptians called their king Pharaoh. And to be more accepted by the locals, he went ahead and called himself Pharaoh Ptolemy. And this began a long line of rulers from his family, his descendants. They called it the Ptolemaic period, and it led to an influx of Grecian influence in Egypt. And that line ended with Cleopatra, another name that you might be more familiar with. So we have this historical backdrop for the story. And as I mentioned last time, I typically create the structure of my novels with a historical event or time period, and then I interweave it with the fictional story, the love story. So here, in this case, I had the time period that I loved, and I needed to weave in a love story. I have always been intrigued with the idea of arranged marriages, marriages of convenience, this kind of thing. So the more I thought about it, the more I wondered about a woman who was in love already and had this thought that she would marry this person that she was in love with, only to be told that she not only had an arranged marriage, but would be pulled out and away from everything that she knew to have this arranged marriage that was advantageous to her family and kind of meant nothing to her. And in this culture, women were in different areas in the ancient world, not in every area, women were a lot considered property. And I'm not advocating that. I'm just saying that's the way it was, at any rate. So this was a very interesting book to research, because there's so much fascinating culture and history going on here. I researched a lot of Greek culture, a lot of Egyptian culture, architecture, practices, home and economics and wedding customs and all kinds of stuff. It was just absolutely fascinating. And so one of the things that I thought was interesting was that in the early Ptolemaic period, not everyone was excited about all these Greeks coming in and this Greek influence. And it was mentioned in the back cover copy, this Alexandrian mob, little like what you think of with the mafia, but not totally. I mean, this is ancient culture here. But I imagine, this girl being in this culture that she's not familiar with, this foreign land, and this added complication of this Alexandrian mob just wreaking havoc, intimidating people, all of it. So here I have this kind of like this soup ripe for a story. Soup doesn't get ripe, or you don't want it to get ripe. Anyways, maybe not the best metaphor. At any rate, so here comes the difficult thing for me at this point in creating the story. Which Ptolemaic ruler am I going to put over the story's, set of time? I ended up deciding on Ptolemy II Soter, however you pronounce it, the second ruler. I don't know what that look was for. It was not meant for you. It was meant for me. Sorry. For two reasons. There were two reasons that in his reign that made me choose that particular ruler. One was his passion after the Library of Alexandria. He really saw to the growth of that library, the filling of that library with a lot of scrolls and writings from that time. And the other thing that happened during that time was the writing of the Septuagint. The Septuagint is the translation of the Hebrew Bible into Greek. So I thought that would just be a neat little added piece at some point in the story. I didn't know where that was going to come in, but I just really felt like that would be a cool thing in the story. So again, fun to research, fun to write. And I think now is the time for the excerpt. And since this is the only book we're doing today, I have picked two excerpts for us to look at. The first one is out of chapter 3, which it means nothing to you. That's okay. But this is, I'm not going to tell you anything about it. I'm just going to read it. How about that? And you're going to just be okay with that. A frown was etched in Alistair's features. That's the end. No, I'm just kidding. A frown was etched in Alistair's features. The sight before him caused his whole body to tense. It was a sight that had greeted his staff early that morning. Naturka had been the only one brave enough to bring him out there to see it. "Get it off," he said, each word enunciated and pushed out of his mouth with force. There were plenty of servants gathered around, but he spoke to no one in particular. On the inner wall of their great garden, 2 symbols, 2 words, were splayed across the wall in what could only be blood. The thick red viscous liquid had dried as it ran in stripes reaching to the ground. A din of whispered conversation among the servants could be heard, but only just. No one wanted to speak out for fear of enraging the general further. Many of the servants were unable to read Greek and had no idea what important message was scarred into their master's most prized sanctuary. As if the vandalism alone wasn't enough to evoke a great anger in him, the message itself had pushed him closer to the edge of violence. They had never seen their kind master in such a state. "What is everybody?" Ismene's voice interrupted their musings. No one, not even Alistair, had even noticed that she had arrived at the grand estate, least of all made it all the way to the gardens. Her voice, which started light and happy, trailed off as she noticed the source of everyone's fixation. There were many audible gasps as the servants, like Alistair, turned and saw Ismene's paled face, her mouth moving as if trying to form words, though none came forth. Alistair rushed over to her. "Ismene, don't look. It's," he said, trying to turn her away, to go back in the direction she had just come. It was only then that he realized the message. It was for her. Ismene and Alona came to the gardens each day to check on her tiger lilies. This wall faced the entrance to the gardens closest to her bedchambers, the entrance she came through every day. How did anyone outside his house and Pharaoh's know that? His heart sank. There was a leak in one of these houses. Ismene stood her ground, refusing to let Alistair turn her away. She was shaking. What? I don't understand," she managed after several seconds. As she glanced up at him, he could see tears in her dark eyes as she repeated the terrible words that were written there. "Go home?" His heart ached for her. "Who wants me to go home?" she asked, voice breaking, clearly injured by the implications. He pulled her into his firm embrace. She began to cry. "Shh," he soothed her, rubbing her shoulders. "It's all right. It doesn't mean anything." He knew it wasn't all right. She was in a foreign land, a place she was having great difficulty adjusting to, a place where she was surrounded by people she didn't know and who were so different from her. She was still adapting to these new people and new culture, new way of doing things, new government, a new way of life. This must have been her worst fear confirmed. Not only did she not know these people, not only were they foreign in many ways, they did not want her here. He kissed the top of her head. "Don't give it any thought, Ismene. Remember last night? Remember how the people cheered for you? They loved you." Her crying stilled for a moment. "This is the work of one person who is dissatisfied with me and is doing this to get back at me. This is not about you, I promise," he lied. He was quite certain this was at least the truth in part, but he feared that it may be the work of the Alexandrian mob and it may well be aimed at her. Ismene allowed him to comfort her a little longer, but before he was ready to let go, she started to pull away. With reluctance, he released his hold on her. He then tugged on her arm more firmly until she was facing the direction she had just come, her back to the wall and the horrible message. "Alona, please take the Lady Ismene to her bedchambers. I'll have some refreshments brought for her." He made sure there was no room for argument in his voice. Alona took Ismene's arm and led her back inside, away from the small crowd and the offensive markings. Alistair watched them go. Once they were inside and a safe distance away, he spun back toward the small crowd of servants. "Get it off." His voice sharp and his words heated. The words penetrated the air, thick with apprehension, before he stormed off. He is mad. Okay, this next excerpt is from 3 chapters later in chapter 6. Ismene heard Alastair in the hall. He's home late. She glanced up from her book as he peered around the corner into her bedchambers. It was a bit odd for him to come to her room. Looking up, she offered him a genuine smile, inviting him in. I'm glad you're home, she offered. Are you hungry? I'll get something. She was already headed for the door. No, he stopped her. Please sit. I'm fine. He took her hand. I just want to sit here with you for a while. Making his way to the chair next to the one she had just vacated, he sat down, but she did not. Instead, she watched him, having noticed that his features were drawn with the weariness of the day's events. The boldness she didn't know she possessed. She moved behind him to rub the tension of whatever had transpired that day out of his muscles. He tensed initially under her touch. She sensed that he was surprised and unsure, but he eased as her hands worked. Then she felt the muscles relaxing. You were so tense, Alastair. Are you all right? She didn't make it a practice to ask after his affairs. Most of the things involving his work she would not understand, and a lot of it he would be obligated to not share even with her. It had also been a part of her let's keep our lives separate plan, but right now it seemed the most natural thing to say. We all underwent some vigorous training today. Is that uncommon? Every now and then we go through bouts of this type of training, he explained. It's more intensive than our usual routines. I see. His body was relaxing and her task was complete. She began to draw her hands away. Thank you, he said, his voice soft. She went to move back, but he took her hand and spun her so he could look into her face. There is something I must tell you. He tugged on her arm and brought her around to sit next to him. That's when she knew that something was wrong. She saw the weary look in his eyes, and she realized it was more than his physical weariness that put it there. Drawing in a deep breath, he spoke the words she didn't want to hear. I have to go away for a while. He was watching her reaction. Did her features betray the concern she was trying with great difficulty to hide? We've been called into battle and we must go, he continued, explaining. Battle? Her breath caught. I won't lie to you, Ismene, and I won't insult you with half-truths. There's always a chance of defeat or capture or... He left the sentence hanging. He didn't need to finish. I think our chances of success are good, but I want only to be honest with you. Her heart was full of worry, settled in the pit of her stomach. Ismene, this is something I've never had to tell anyone. I've always gone and come with no one to concern myself with. His eyes held hers. All of a sudden, she needed to be doing something with her hands. She pulled her eyes away from his and looked down at her book. Closing it, she tried to be interested in the texture of the scroll. He waited for her to process it, waited for her to speak. When will you go? She asked after some time, eyes still on the book covering. Tomorrow. Her head jerked up. Tomorrow? So soon? When Pharaoh makes a decision, we proceed at once. And I agree with his desire for immediacy on this matter. The only reason we didn't go today is that the men will need to be rested for what is to come. Ismene was overwhelmed with her concern for him. But it was more than that. It was something she was getting tired of fighting, but was still afraid to expose. What can I do to help you prepare? She met his eyes, pushing her worries aside. That would do him no good. There was surprise in his eyes. Surprise to her reaction? And something else. Appreciation? Yes, there it was. Certain respect for her ability to face what must be done. There are no preparations left to be made for the journey. Everything is ready. She glanced away, saddened somehow that she was useless to him. You could read to me. It would help calm my mind. She peered at him with a quirked eyebrow for a handful of seconds. Then, resigning herself to his request, she said, Of course. What would you like for me to read? Read to me of Greece. He leaned back in the lounge chair, glancing at the book she'd been reading, and smiled. About Pegasus? Her face warmed as she realized he'd been looking at her book and noted her interest in something that was a tale for children. When she looked back up at him, there was a question in her eyes, but he gestured that he did, in fact, want her to read from that book. Ismene settled herself and opened the scroll. Pegasus is a creature that has made its place among the mythical creatures of old. She repeated the words she knew almost by heart from her father's stories. Even as an adult, these stories still captivated her. A winged horse? Her imagination carried her away to the skies where Pegasus soared above the troubles of the world and escaped all manner of tribulation, including war. A strange sound caused her to glance up from the pages at her husband, only to find him sleeping. How long had she been reading? She looked back down at the book. Only a few passages in, not long. He was just that tired. Setting her scroll down, she moved to her bed to grab a blanket for him. She returned to where he continued to slumber and laid the blanket over him, adjusting it in hopes of making him as comfortable as possible. It was impossible to tear herself away for some time, so she sat and watched the rise and fall of his chest, watched his face at rest, at peace. Her heart was stirred again with the mixture of emotions she still had not been able to sort through, and found herself fearful to surrender to them. An impulsive idea entered her head, and she found cause to give herself over to it. She leaned over and pressed a gentle kiss to his forehead. He stirred in sleep but did not wake. Their faces so close. And knowing that after tonight she may never see him again, she found the courage to place a kiss on his lips. It had been her intention to kiss him gently and retire to bed, but her kiss caused him to awaken, and he responded, returning her kiss. His hands moved to caress her face. Pulling back just far enough to look at him, she searched his eyes. There was great affection there and great care. She knew that she cared for him too. It did hurt her to think that something might happen to him. He sat up and tentatively kissed her again, pulling her into his strong embrace. Her head was swimming. She reveled in the feeling of being secure in his arms. When the kiss broke, she pulled away and stood up. There was a question and a hurt in his eyes. Taking his hand without speaking, she bade him get to his feet before pulling him toward her bed. There was no need for words. And such is the end of that excerpt. And now we are to the part where we talk about the giveaway. Here once again is how our giveaway will work. I will pose a question and invite you to answer in the comments. And for the people that will be watching the live event later, we will keep the comments or the giveaway open for 24 hours. So it is 2:33 right now by my computer's timer. So at 2:33 p.m. Central Standard Time on April 3rd, we will no longer take comments. I mean, you can comment as long as you want, but the comment section, as far as being entered into the giveaway, will stop at 2:33 p.m. Central Standard Time on April 3rd. And we will do a random drawing of those who have made comments up until that time and choose a winner. There we have it. It's right there in the comment section. The winner will receive a paperback copy of The General's Wife and a $10 Amazon gift card. Both of those will be sent from Amazon. So unfortunately, I won't be able to sign it for you, but we just think that that is the most appropriate thing and the safest thing at this time. So again, those won't be coming from my home. Those will be coming from Amazon. So here is the question. What is your favorite time period and or location? I would love to hear about it. I don't know. I didn't think about my answer to this before I sent it. Having written books from several different time periods, it's hard for me to say that I have a favorite. If you asked me, I was going to say, if you asked me early on, I would have said, and then I was like, what would I have said? I don't know. Usually I say the book that I'm working on, but right now I'm working on the fourth book in the Convenient Risk series and the third book in the Bornikova series, and a book that is inspired by the women's suffrage movement. So I'm one of those writers that works on multiple books at the same time. So I'm kind of loving those time periods right now. But I also always have a special place in my heart for this Ptolemaic period because it was just so much fun to write. So I will end this live with that question again. What is your favorite time period and or location? And I look forward to reading your answers. And I look forward to the next live. It's on Monday at 2 p.m. Central Standard Time. Same Sara time, same Sara channel. And we will be talking about Off to War. And I look forward to it. See you then.